pieces of the conversation that they're having at these No Kings rallies, and that would pertain to the conflict currently ongoing in the Middle East. And so we do want to now continue that conversation, and to do so, I want to bring in the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, Peter Doran. Peter, thanks so much for being with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
Well, there's a lot to discuss today. Of course, we've been watching some of these negotiations ongoing throughout the week. Also, making sure to note that as we're covering these No Kings protests, that's also been a portion of what some of those folks have been talking about. But let's initially kind of focus on what we've been hearing this week from the Trump administration. There have been floated ideas out there about negotiations happening behind the scenes with the Trump administration and some of them in Iran and their administration as well. What else are we learning as we're watching this?
Well, Christina, essentially this week we saw President Trump juggling chainsaws. And so far, he hasn't even cut himself. On one hand, he needs to maintain broad public support, or especially political support by his base. And he can do that by keeping oil prices in check. These efforts to negotiate with the Iranian regime in Tehran serve two purposes. On one hand, it gives this regime an off-ramp if they wish to take it. I don't think they will. And it also gives some reassurance to the oil markets not to panic. This allows him the space and time he needs to coil the spring for what remains in Operation Epic Freedom, Christina.
Absolutely. And we've been continuing to get some of those numbers and watching as this is all unfolding. President Trump, though, and some of course his supporters have been saying that this was ultimately the right move to make there in the region. I do want to ask you about the portion of the conversation that includes Israel. We did see them launch that joint force attack back on February 28th. How have they been continuing to come into this conversation throughout the last few weeks and almost at a month now at this point? Also, including the fact that they're fighting against Hezbollah as well, that has a base in Lebanon.
The big takeaway from Operation Epic Fury is that bombs may win wars, Christina, but allies ultimately achieve final victory. Look, when we step back and we see the contribution that Israel has made, I think the United States is drawing a very powerful lesson here. When you go to war with a highly capable, near-peer ally, it amplifies your military impact. The ability to operate in tandem with Israel is certainly remarkable given what we've seen in past decades with the contribution of other allies. More than that, though, Israel has been fighting So when we add the attack on Hezbollah into the mix, sure, that's an additional variable. But I think when the books are closed on this operation, Israel's contribution is going to be a major positive takeaway, one that we would want to replicate in Asia with Taiwan and with other NATO allies.
And so we're also seeing this, I want to put this on the screen, some of the video footage we have from earlier this week as well in central Israel. I do want to point this out. The United States also said that they have established the High Joint Coordination Committee to, quote, intensify cooperation to prevent terrorist attacks and ensure that Iraqi territory is not used as a launching point for any aggression. This is for the U.S. and Iraq at this point. And so I want to ask you here, Peter, as we're looking at the region as a whole, there are other countries that are sort of being pulled into this conflict. What do you think this means for this joint agreement to come between the U.S. and Iraq?
Well, we're seeing a fundamental reordering of geopolitical power in the Middle East as we speak. Honestly, we saw some video there of Israel. We have seen just how resilient their society has become to these kinds of attacks. That's encouraging. We see very broad-based political support for this operation in Israel now. But Christina, I would point out to you the United Arab Emirates, the UAE there at the on the southern end of the Persian Gulf, looking at this map here, the UAE has taken the brunt of missile and drone attacks, and it has remained firm. It has shown its own resolve, and it has demonstrated its capability to defend itself with air defense assets. This didn't happen overnight. In an operation like this, you go to war with the inventories you have. In this case, the inventories of air defense missiles and other we'll call them weapons to defend your cities and critical infrastructure. The UAE and other Gulf states are banding together, and I think we will see long-term positive consequences as a result of this process. Before these operations unfolded, Operation Rising Lion and Epic Fury, it would have been hard to predict these outcomes. Now I think we're seeing what's unfolding as a result.
And so I'm glad you pointed that out, because it was just reported earlier today that at least 6 people were injured in the capital of the UAE after falling debris from an intercepted ballistic missile sparked 3 fires in an air economic zone near Abu Dhabi. 6 people ultimately injured there. Does that sort of speak to, again, the fallout from these other countries in the region, how they're having to deal with sort of watching all of this unfold? They might not be directly involved, but again, within the UAE, they're so close to the Strait of Hormuz, which has also been a huge and critical point of what we're watching in this conflict.
Well, we're seeing a new page in modern warfare unfold in front of our eyes. We got a taste of that over several years, seeing Russia's attacks on Ukraine, and now we're seeing Iran, the clerical regime in Iran, do the same against its Gulf neighbors like the UAE. Here's the big point. The United Arab Emirates has prepared itself, perhaps better than most, to defend against these kinds of attacks with, and this is important, a lot of American hardware, a lot of American air defense equipment. Problem with this new emerging form of warfare is that you can hit 100 incoming missiles or drones, but if one of them gets through, you're going to have a headline, you're going to have a report of casualties or damage to infrastructure. So far, we can take a positive note, but we are going to see attacks like these continue.
And Peter, before I let you go, it was reported earlier this week that the United States is sending additional resources there to the Middle East. Can you sort of help us walk through what purpose we could be seeing there? 3 aircraft carrier, in fact, just left just yesterday from Norfolk, Virginia, heading towards that region. What could be the purpose of us seeing this increased sort of resources going there to countries in the Middle East?
Well, Admiral Cooper at CENTCOM and General Kane at the Pentagon, the Department of War, are coiling the spring. It's very obvious that they are going to give President Trump his maximalist options for essentially putting an end to this operation militarily, and then giving the Iranian people the time and space they need to seize their own country, to take their own country back from this clerical regime. Here's my timeline. I expect over the next week or so to see a continuation in the high tempo attacks against military and economic targets in Iran, and at the same time, President Trump trying to keep the oil markets and the stock markets from panicking. After about a week or so, we could see action against Krag Island, which is the point where Iran exports most of its oil. But I certainly look to see the Strait of Hormuz being reopened to commercial shipping without companies and shipping firms having to pay this toll of several $1 million to the Iranian regime just to slip through.
Well, we certainly appreciate you for joining us here on Live Now from Fox, Peter, as we're still kind of diving into the details. Updates are coming in really every few hours or so watching this region, so we certainly appreciate your expertise at this time.